Hi everybody, my name's Victoria, and today I'm going to be doing a book review of Black Leopard, Red Wolf by Marlon James. If you're wondering where I am, I'm in my classroom because this, I think, might be the only time I have to film all week. So it's just one of those weeks and it's going to be crazy, but I have a little break right now because the students are actually at a pep rally kind of thing, and so I don't have any students. The students come out of their class to come to music class, and so they're all at the pep rally right now. So I was like, hey, maybe I should film a video real quick. So Black Leopard, Red Wolf has been getting a huge amount of hype. You've probably seen it by now. This is kind of a weird book to get a lot of hype when you read it because it's really not one that's going to appeal to everyone. And after reading it, it's really a strange book to be hyping up because it's very, I think, inaccessible to a wide amount of readers because it is very dense and it's not easy to read at all. It's very lengthy. It's very hard to understand at times. I had a really complicated relationship with the book while I was reading it because I wasn't really enjoying myself for about the first half of the book. It was really hard to get into. To give you a synopsis of the book first, this book is about a character named Tracker, and we are following this story told from his perspective. When we meet Tracker, he is captured by someone, and we don't know who, but we just know he's captured and he's talking to someone called the Inquisitor, and he is telling them a story. And so when we're meeting him, we're seeing the story through his eyes. He goes on to tell you the story of how he was searching for a missing child, and he starts the book by telling you that this child is dead. So this is not a spoiler. This is just how he starts the book. So we know something about this journey already, but the book is definitely not about the plot. Ultimately, it is about the journey. He's recruited because he has a nose, and he has this weird ability to track people based on scent, kind of like a wolf. Telling you any more about the plot would be giving you some spoilers, so that's all you're gonna get from me. But I'm gonna list 3 positive things about this book and then 3 negative things. The first of those positive things is that I think that this book is so unique and the world is so expansive and interesting, and I've never read any kind of book like it in my whole entire life. And so if you are looking for something that's really going to test your reading, expand your reading, if you're looking for a new place to be, this is a really interesting backdrop. It's basically set in an ancient Africa that is untouched by Western civilization, and so there's a lot of new things, new ideas for the Western reader. If you haven't really had a lot of knowledge about ancient Africa, there's tons of mythology and folklore that you learn about. I was honestly Googling things as I was reading the book because there's so many really interesting myths and creatures and folklore that I didn't know about, and it was really fun to kind of learn about those along the way as I was reading this fictional story. This is a really different kind of fantasy. I know that there's a misconception out there that this is an African Game of Thrones. It's not. That was a joke made by the author, and then the media grabbed onto it, and then they ran with it. And for some reason, that became what people were calling it. And even though Marlon James said that jokingly, he's not trying to compare it to Game of Thrones. It's a very different book. There may be some similarities with some of the political structures and hierarchies, but no, I would say this is a lot darker than Game of Thrones, and that's saying something, because if you know anything about Game of Thrones, it's pretty dark. But this is an even darker book. The second positive thing I want to talk about is the character development. This book has fantastic character development. It has really interesting characters. I found all the characters to be fairly complex. There's some exceptions where I would have liked to have more information, but I think Marlon James does that on purpose. I think there's some characters he doesn't want you to know very much about. The next 2 books in the trilogy are actually going to be the same story told by different characters, and so I think there are some characters that are purposefully sort of vague. This book is definitely about the characters though, especially Tracker. Tracker has a really complicated and devastating backstory, and getting to know him was quite an experience, and the more you got to know him, the more you understood why he was making certain decisions. That being said, this book is all about narrators and unreliable narrators, so there's some characters that maybe seem like they're telling the truth, and then we're going to get other stories that kind of conflict. I don't know. It's just really layer upon layer in this book, and the characters are complicated. The third positive thing that I have to talk about this book is the very rich, poetic prose. Marlon James is obviously a very talented writer. He is very thought-provoking. If you are familiar with literary fiction and you enjoy very rich, kind of dense prose, this is definitely the book for you. If that's not your thing and you want something that's really fast-paced and easy to read, this is not going to be the book for you. I had to read much of this book in kind of small bites, which is why it took me about 2 weeks to read this book all the way through, which I usually average like a book a week or so, depending on what it is, but this one I could not read very quickly because it just takes a lot of focus. Now let's get into some of the things that might detract from your experience, or at least detracted from mine. Maybe these things won't detract from your experience, but I will tell you what I had an issue with in this book. Number one is the pacing. This book doesn't really get to the plot until like 150 pages in. And to me, that's just a little bit too much backstory. For me, I would like to know why I should care about these characters and why I should care about the story a little sooner than that. I didn't really understand why I was supposed to care until like 150 pages in. So I would have liked to get a little more to the point. But in my personal opinion, this book was longer than it needed to be in several sections of the book, not just the beginning. I think it was just a little bit wordy and lengthy at times. The second thing that might be difficult with this book is the very crude and terrible things that happen. It's very brutal, it's very graphic in a way that I've never read before in another book. This is not just describing something that happens, this is describing something in excruciating detail, something very hard to read about. And that goes from everything from rape to murder, very graphic violence, violence against children. It's just a lot. It's really heavy. It's really heavy. So if that is not something you feel like you could handle in a book, absolutely stay away from this one. Personally, for me, I found it to be over the top at times. I have no problem with devastating things happening in books to propel the story forward. However, I don't need every excruciating detail to get the picture. Perhaps that's a personal preference, but I just don't need all that detail about these terrible, terrible things. I can get the picture if you just tell me that these things are happening. I don't need any more. So we're gonna move on from that one for now. The third issue I had with this book is that sometimes it was told in a way that I was disconnected from the story. And again, Marlon James actually is intentionally doing this. In this book, you'll often find a story within a story within a story. Sometimes you have 3 or 4 layers of characters telling stories, and it's a little bit hard to keep track of what's happening. And he does that intentionally. He wants you to be a little confused and lost, but it's not enjoyable. It's not a fun experience for the reader to be confused and lost. So that detracted from my experience overall. And because there were stories upon stories upon stories, I would sometimes feel disconnected from the characters when bad things happened to them. Sometimes something would happen to a character and I'd be like, no emotion whatsoever. I don't care. Because at this point my brain is just trying to process, like, where am I? Who's telling the story? I don't know. I just found myself a little bit disconnected at times. I will conclude this book review by saying this is, again, not a book for everyone. If you enjoy literary fiction and you want to stay on top of what's happening in the literary fiction world, this is definitely up your alley. If that's not really your thing and you're in it for plot and something interesting happening all the time, then you're going to be lost in this book and you may want to put it down. I actually did want to put it down several times, but it was also interesting enough for me to keep reading. So take that comment for what it is. Personally, there were so many good things about this book, and I was honestly disappointed that so many of these other things were detracting from my experience. And so I actually am ultimately giving this book 3 out of 5 stars. I really wanted to like it more, but because my overall experience was not super enjoyable, although I did find this to be an interesting book, I think it's just an okay book for me. It was not a fantastic read. And so it may deserve more stars than that, truly, but for me personally, I'm going to have it at 3 stars. Have you read this book? I would love to know. Are you interested in reading this book? Does it sound like something you might pick up or not? Let me know down below in the comments. I'd love to chat about this book because I have so many thoughts. I hope you've enjoyed this book review. I hope it has been helpful to you, and I will see you in my next video and chat with you in the comments. Bye-bye.